पास पैसे नहीं हैं, मेरे पास खाने का नहीं है, इसलिए साहब बहुत परेशान हो गए साहब।
Here in this video, we'll be talking about how this pandemic has affected the socially sunk groups, mainly focusing on the lower class people, Dalit, and the northeastern people. Basically, while one part of the people enjoy all sort of comfort like that with the medical support and their job, they manage to feed them and their families as well. But on the other hand, we have directly the opposite set of people who really face a lot of difficulties. They survive in the edge of the unprotected and uncertain work. Their lives has become uncertain to a larger extent. They don't even have access to proper drinking water, food, shelter. They feel extra burdened during this lockdown. When they don't even have proper drinking water facility, how can we expect them to maintain sanitation? It's pretty hard for them to fight against COVID with no support. The coronavirus pandemic has strengthened class segregation in India. As citizens bearing equal rights, migrant workers, Dalits, tribals, Muslims, and sexual minorities are a substantial part of the modern nation state. These set of people often left behind and live in isolation and are often treated with mistrust and are also a big threat to the nation's culture. Due to this huge pandemic, it is more evident that the migrant workers are facing the worst hit. They are most vulnerable people. They'll have to face multiple difficulties altogether. They should fight against this pandemic. Heartless neglect of civil society. And finally, the hard and disciplinary measure of the state that has rendered them unemployed, hunger, and homeless. However, coronavirus has forced us to at least talk about the plight of the poor. The government has provided everything that they can support with. They've given all kind of awareness like lockdown, social distancing, washing hands. Initially, when they don't even have the proper water facility, how can we expect them to wash their hands? Does this mean they're exempted from this population? They don't need basic facility or necessity to fight against COVID? It's a huge question. Government is struggling hard to support the socially sunk groups and are also trying to support each and every one to feed themselves and their family. But even in spite of that, a lot of people are struggling for their daily life. It's not the same for all people. It's a pandemic in unequal India. COVID 19 is a global epidemic. There is a growing acceptance within the middle class that everybody is untouchable today. Now, concentrating more with the workers' part, the most hit in the society, the migrant workers. They have lost their jobs, many have started walking to move to their natives. Most of them are dependent on either the government or the private charity for food, as well as shelters. As the coronavirus crisis worsens in the country, the low income class Indians can either save their jobs or lives. As currently, the government keeps insisting on closing of schools, colleges, workplace, and etc. Many are asked to work from home. But when we see the reality part of the poor people, poor population is dependent on this physical interaction. It is vital for them to go to the workplace for their survival. For all those who work from home is an unaffordable luxury. The government concentrates in flattening the curve of COVID, but this has left a majority of the population behind. We cannot expect them to quarantine themselves. It is more fascinating term for them. They have very limited job security, and when they don't even have them, how can they expect or think about the paid sick leaves? This one, the one which is more common to one part of the population, is a very big deal and so called luxury for the other part of the population. How are they going to face this COVID with these inequalities and unequal living opportunities is a huge question in all minds.
History bears testimony to the fact that unlike most of the world, India is not new to the practice of social distancing. Why? Because maintaining social as well as physical distance has been historically entrenched in various forms of isolation by the upper caste in the Hindu social order ever since the Vedic times. Based on this social distancing, which today is claimed to be the only curative measure for COVID-19, it has always been used as a socially sanctioned weapon of discrimination against the lower caste and Dalits. It has been a part of India's unjust history and continues to be a reality even in India's fight against corona. Before dwelling into this, it is pertinent we know how the social discrimination even came about. Based on the theological model of cosmology in Hindu scriptures, which talks about the Varna system in the society, they are the Brahmin, the Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. They are mutually exclusive, hereditary, endogamous, and occupation-based. Besides these four Varnas, there is a fifth category of people known as the untouchables, or the Adi-Shudras, also known as the lowest of the low. The Adi-Shudras were outside the purview of the Varna system, where even their shadow was considered to be polluting. Along with the curse of untouchability, they had to perform menial jobs for the higher caste. They were not allowed to use the common burial ground, and they were deprived of ownership rights to land and property, leading to the lack of access to all sorts of economic mobility. The Dalits had no right to have any property. They had to eat the foulest of foods, including leftovers thrown away by the higher Varnas. They were not allowed to draw water from the common well. They were prohibited from entering temples. They were not allowed to live in the main village inhabited by the upper Varnas. They were barred from the right to education and knowledge. It would be logical to think that if the Dalits get access to education, get better jobs, and earn more money to raise their socio-economic status, their relations with the higher caste and their status quo would improve. But the largest impediment to this process is the ethos of the people, the so-called upper caste of this country, who are unable to move beyond their set beliefs of superiority and inferiority. The Dalits were subjected to both social exclusion and economic discrimination over the centuries. In one form or the other, this continues even today in most parts of the country, especially during the pandemic. Caste system is a butterfly whose flapping wings have an effect on all kinds of interactions of an individual, from the way one dresses and lives to the way in which one earns a living and makes a livelihood. Caste is a compelling dictator which commands everything, including this virus. It is caste-based jobs such as scavenging, sanitation, drain cleaning, their subsequent minimal social values, inadequate remunerations leading to unhygienic slum-based lifestyle which makes Dalit and Adivasi communities tormented not just by their caste identities and its repercussions, but also by the fatal risks of COVID-19. From the Yadini community, which is a waste picker and drain cleaning community of Andhra Pradesh, which has been barred from purchasing essentials such as food and medicine by their upper caste locales, to children of Musahar community of Varanasi sustaining on grass, regardless of the noble intent, the lockdown was not just a preventing lockdown. It was a lockdown from access to food, water, shelter, medicines, livelihood, employment for many whose lives were just not important enough for the government's consideration. From the healthcare schemes to availing direct cash transfers, every other mechanism which seeks to address these social and economic have-nots ends up becoming yet another unaffordable luxury or inaccessible privilege for them. The lockdown and absolute quarantine presumes that everyone has a shelter in a country with 1.8 million homeless population. The direct money transfer policy presumes that everyone has an active bank account. The requirement of providing government identification and documents to variations, subsidies, and healthcare presumes that everyone is documented in an economy which is mostly informal. This presumed socio-economic well-being of all in a society which has been fabricated on graded inequality is a manifestation of the kind of elitist indifference that characterizes our current social landscape.
I am going to be continuing on the struggles faced by the northeastern community. As we all know that COVID-19 spreads throughout the country, yet another terrifying virus continues to spread, one of racism and communalism. What's happening to the northeastern community during this time is very unfortunate. This has been happening even before the global pandemic. Unfortunately, they are subjected to racism from mainlanders in India for a very long time. They are seen as outsiders in their own country, and especially since the COVID-19 spread to the world from Wuhan, China, the northeastern community has been facing discrimination due to their mongoloid facial features. They have been called as Chinese or Corona and blamed for spreading the virus to India just because of their ethnicity. Deliberately or cases of mistaken identity, people from Northeast have become victims of acts, racial slurs and stereotypical discrimination. Like many across the country, the northeastern region accounts for thousands of residents contributing to the workforce and the skilled labor in India metropolitan cities. People from the northeastern India who are settled and living in different parts of the country face struggles daily during this pandemic. They are treated as second-class citizens. They have been spat on, denied entry into shops, expelled from rented apartments. This has affected their social mobility, and they are now even scared to venture out of their homes to buy essentials required for survival. There have been many incidents reported across the country. 9 youth from Nagaland were forcibly quarantined in Ahmedabad despite showing no symptoms nor history of any foreign travel or contact with COVID-19 patient. They were simply quarantined on the complaint because they looked like Chinese and they might be carrying virus. Yet another incident in the capital, which was reported by Indian Express, that a man passed comment at a 25-year-old woman when she objected. He spat at her and yelled Corona. This behavior comes from a feeling that somehow we are superior beings and they are below us. While these outbursts are blatant representation of unbalanced power relation, they are part of a larger and more permanent structure which has existed for much longer. It's time we take a hard look at the way we treat marginalized groups and pay attention to their struggles. Virus and bacteria do not discriminate, but society does. Societal structures shaped by oppressive structural forces of casteism, classism, communalism, and patriarchy render a certain section vulnerable. Not just this virus, no epidemic or a disaster can threaten the existence of socially shunned groups to the extent that the caste and poverty does. The biggest issue for them is not the invisible virus, but the hatred in the hearts of Indians so visible. We are witnessing a society doing everything that the government wants to do to kill the virus. Clapping hands, lighting lamps, staying at home and practicing social isolation. Inhabitants of rich India are quoting law to the oppressed and poor, asking them to follow the government instruction. They do all this because they perceive their lives are on the line. But at the same time, the same section of society somehow refuses to acknowledge that the Indian Constitution prohibits discrimination on the grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth. Due to the information blitz surrounding the COVID-19, as well as fear and anxiety, many are aware of the exact number of people who have been affected by the COVID-19. But how many of us are aware of the atrocities that have been caused to the socially shunned groups during this COVID-19 and during the pandemic?